English translation 720th contact. Saturday the 11th of May 2019, 22:07 hours.
Ah, Quetzal, greetings and welcome, my friend. What's the matter?
It is something personal that I want to discuss with you, and for which I want to ask your advice. After that, Ta will come here. But greetings to you too, and thanks for welcoming me too.
Of course you, like all of you, are always welcome to me. So that is no problem, even if Ptah is still coming.
My request is of a private nature that...
Of course, that is also no problem. On the one hand, we are alone and have no listeners, and on the other hand, I do not call up private conversations either, so nothing is recorded in writing. Besides, it's up to you alone, as you know, whether you want to save it for yourself or not.
That is so, yes. But in general, the private conversations are also...
Yes, I know. But the fact that you also centrally archive every private word of every private conversation in addition to your private recordings, that does not mean for me that I also have to write down these recordings when I retrieve them. So you can rest assured, but you should know that, because we have had many a private conversation, and I have not retrieved any, and I have also not written them down, as I do with everyone else when we have private conversations.
I know that very well. Then I will start with the following.
Oh, I see, but do not worry. What I have to say about everything is the following.
It took a little longer than I thought, but I thank you very much for your advice. I'm always amazed at the variety of factors you take into consideration when you give advice or otherwise speak or explain anything. You therefore see and recognize much more than how should I say it? It is that you always more, just that.
Excuse me if I cut you off again, but I think you want to say something like, what can be dear to some human beings? Or am I wrong?
About that way, I actually wanted to say something. It is just always amazing. But now I must go my way, for Ptah is already waiting. Farewell, dear friend, and once again I pay you my thanks.
Goodbye, Quetzal, my friend. It is always my honor.
Greetings, Edward, dear friend.
Greetings, Ptah. It is a pleasure to have you come, so be welcome, my friend. Quetzal was also here, and he just left earlier.
Thanks. Yes, we agreed because he had private matters to discuss with you, which is why I waited. However, I have come here to inform you about what I have fathomed regarding your private questions about future events concerning the American president, his behavior, actions and his plans, etc. In doing so, also necessary probability foresights arose, that is to say, prophetic foresights, which show extreme unpleasantnesses should they fulfill themselves under certain circumstances. But before I get to talk about that, I want to explain a few things concerning the behavior of the President Donald Trump, of whom you said that he would speak like a boy attending the third-grade class, since he would be really lowly intelligent and uneducated. I have personally checked this and established that your assessment in this regard is just as true as your explanation that he basically would not play this like an actor, but that his uncultured behavior in this regard was not a strategy, rather low intelligence and a weakness insurmountable for him. At the same time, however, he is disingenuously shrewd, mean and unpredictable, as well as imperious, and is able to use his uneducated speaking as a perfect means of persuasion in such a way that his electorate is influenced by it, as you once had put it, that they fall in bondage to him. Hence,
Excuse me, because to this I would still like to say that all those who fall prey to him are, from my point of view, simple-minded, that is to say human beings who have no opinion of their own, are incapable of assessment and are indeed also with low intelligence, and hang on other people's every word and cheer them on when they get buttered up by them. That is to say, when they are cheated with lies, empty promises, and deception. This is actually the case when populism is practiced. The way in which this is mastered by Tramp Trump and the way in which all simple-minded people are taken in, who are incapable of their own thinking and decision-making. These human beings see the whole world and also anything that is said and talked about, as if through a picture frame, in which everything takes place and becomes imagined effective facts. Because nothing else is perceived, seen, and recognized than what is actually only visible through the frame, while everything outside of it remains invisible to these human beings, seeing through frames. Everything is thereby about as if something is observed through a telescope, and indeed, only what is visible in front of the lens can be seen. And human beings who see everything in a picture frame or telescope sight can also only hear what is said and spoken inside such a frame. If in this context the language is used and formed according to the 5 forms of hypnosis, namely within the framework of populism, originality, that is to say, original characteristic vernacular language, metaphors informed in the listener's sense, then the whole affects the audience in a plausible, suggestive, indoctrinative way, and moreover like a universal code that makes the listeners helpless and without will, and thus leads them to endorse everything that the speakers say. But connected with this is the fact that understanding, rationality, and intellect and the intelligentum are suspended, whereby all paths are opened to, for example, through negative speeches or entire negative campaigns, disparage and make look ridiculous on the part of opponents, enemies, or any other kind of human beings through hatred, lies, deception, and slander in public, etc., and that only because one wants to be great and mighty oneself. This works particularly well in this way, because the human being of Earth creates a conservative authoritarian mentality from childhood on through a wrong education, later through a wrong self-education and connected with a religious belief, which mentality is very susceptible to all evil, bad, external language influence, as well as to anxiety and stress. Thus, a negative inner attitude is developed which is massively influenced in relation to one's own well-being and survival, and which is also using Gewalt, to consequently the factors of the brain correspondingly responsible for it appear to be neurologically better and more relevant than everything good, peaceful, loving, free, harmonious, fellow human, and all positive. The conclusion that emerges from all this, however, is near and far wrongly appraised, namely because psychologists and cognitive scientists erroneously assume that Trump would not be simple-minded and not with low intelligence, but rather intelligent and strategic, because he is able to create anxieties and bogeymen among his followers through his irrational and confused speeches and modes of action, and can in a populist way trick them, lie to them, and deceive them. And that in doing so he disparages women, co-workers, dissenters, foreigners, other states, refugees, and opponents, as well as everybody else, with dirty insults and words. That of course impresses all simple-minded people who hang on his every word, as well as who in their low intelligence are not able to perceive and not to understand of which crooked mentality this Trump really is. Nor is it recognized by all his followers, because in their foolishness they are also simply incapable of assessing his intentions, that he is not only a primitive, disingenuous, false-playing, and imperious despot, but also a very dangerous warmonger, who may under certain circumstances be willing to maneuver the humankind into another world war. And that he, in fact, while doing so only spreads his own dark fantasies absent any truth, content with lies and deception far away from all truth and the effective facts, just as hatred and conscious false information as well as imbecilic sanctioning measures against other states, etc., that the lowly intelligent ones paying homage to him cannot logically follow. And in their roaring foolishness they also do not notice that their Trump with his primitive speeches, accusations and allegations and false information, etc., endlessly stirs around in the same mush, and thus maltreats their memory so badly that they believe him everything and give their own intellect and their own rationality the marching orders. And they continue to do that until he has unleashed a war in his confusion, which will then once again cost the lives of many Americans when they have to spoon out his soup, which he has broken into them over the years, be it in China or Persia, because he has included these two states above all in his hatred and his imbecility, although Russia is also being incorporated into his sick brain. In any case, so I think, the near future for the Earth and its humankind looks gloomy under the command of this crazy Trump, because the guy may, under certain circumstances, really manage to plunge the world into an evil war. In particular, In his delusion, as I have already said, he has focused on China and Persia. Although according to my consideration, Persia will initially be his first target for attack, if there will really be a crash.
What I was going to explain, you have just anticipated, because in fact I have arrived at the same results. And that there is a threat of war in Persia that has already been established at the present time. Since plans have long been worked out that are thought up in such a disgraceful fashion that Persia is to be held accountable for alleged sabotage of merchants' ships at the Gulf of Oman, in the Persian Gulf. This preparation will also include a feigned warning from the United States for the shipping sector in order to ahead of time pretend that Persia is a perpetrator. The relocation of the aircraft carrier USS Abraham Lincoln to the Persian Gulf is also part of the preparation of the malicious and disingenuous plans that are considering bringing Persia under the control of the United States. The act of sabotage will actually be perpetrated next month by secret American machinations, as I have fathomed, which will then provide a rationale for attacking Persia. And these secret deceptive machinations and justifications, as has already been twice the case in Iraq by the lies and deception of the two U.S. presidents, father and son Bush may indeed lead to the U.S. forces invading Persia. What will in the near future happen in the Persian Gulf is grounded on the fact that Persia is to be prevented from building nuclear weapons. In this regard, the USA claim, as they did in a similar way when Iraq was attacked twice by the USA, which led to the Gulf Wars, that Persia would already have often violated corresponding conditions of the Nuclear Weapons Treaty, which was terminated by the USA because on the one hand, Persia and Russia are allied with Syria, but on the other hand also in order to be able to bring Persia under U.S. control for the sake of the crude oil, and namely, if necessary, by an invasion of the armed forces. Since 1980, no diplomatic relations have existed between the USA and Persia, the way they still were at your time when you stayed there and also met the emperor. Then, in 1979, Persian revolutionary troops attacked the U.S. Embassy in Tehran and took more than 50 hostages, due to whom a liberation attempt was carried out by U.S. troops, which however failed, and since then, no U.S. embassy exists anymore in Tehran. Nevertheless, there were again and again problems between Persia and the USA, whereby time and again alleged violations on the part of Persia of the nuclear agreement were complained about. The USA terminated the agreement and imposed again sanctions. And because Persia, for its part, announced that it would itself also partially suspend the agreement, the aircraft carrier USS Abraham Lincoln, together with escort ships, was ordered to the Persian Gulf. And this, because the USA are politically striving for something specific that they also want to realize, and namely a thing that is quite clear and disingenuous. Since also this, and the actions of the USA that will still follow, undoubtedly pursue a very specific determination, which shall ultimately bring Persia and all Arab states fully under the control and might of the USA. To this end, the USA, and in their sense also the German Chancellor, who provided assistance, triggered the mass waves of refugees to Europe. And this solely for the purpose of putting the European states, which all belong to the EU dictatorship, under pressure and destroying them in their structures in such a way that they shall ultimately join the USA in an alliance. Only Switzerland is still excluded from this, but it too is endangered in its freedom by persons who are betraying their homeland and fanatically flirting with the EU dictatorship and the USA. The real reason for the rise of the mass waves of refugees to Europe, provoked by the USA and Chancellor Merkel, is therefore that from the whole in Europe a new regulation is to be created according to American system, in order to in this way create a bastion against Russia and China, and namely owing to the anxiety of the USA leaders of the country regarding the possibility of these two states invading Europe together. And this bastion is to emerge from the fact that, precisely because caused by the flows of refugees, All national borders throughout Europe have to be sealed off so rigorously and impermeably that no human being can any longer enter a European country unrecognized. The reason for this is formed by an illogical anxiety confusion that through a complete border blockade, by which also no refugees can any longer reach Europe, no underground fighters and right-wing extremists from Russia and China would be able to enter Europe illegally and carry out political underground activities. The entirety of these secretly nourished fears by the USA and the EU dictatorship is completely illogical, childish and confused. But nevertheless, already for years such potential illegal agents, etc., have been feared, which of course would be concealed from the public and denied should it be made public officially. Already for several generations, the USA have been secretly and repeatedly planning to erect a bastion against Russia and China in Europe and to force Europe with ever greater sanctions to support the US-American endeavors so that the United States of America will be able to assert their striving for world domination. Just as all other states are then also to be brought under compulsory U.S. control through sanctions. And the fact that Donald Trump, moreover, is steered like a trained animal according to the will of various elements of warmongering advice, in particular by the criminal and like Trump might-obsessed hegemonic chief of security John Robert Bolton. That fact he is not able to perceive due to his foolishness and his megalomania just as much as all those who believe they can assess him. That he indeed would not be lowly intelligent but a great strategist. And the fact that these determinations have already been planned for a long time, indeed already over several generations, and namely beginning after the end of the last World War, has on the 3rd of October 2007 even been clearly and publicly stated by the American General of the USA Army, Debussy, who resigned from his service, when he in a general sense made the following statement. So that also the plan of the U.S. military strategist Thomas M. Barnett succeeds, in the sense that the mass migration to Europe demanded by him and militarily arranged for the change of the population's ethnic composition of the European nations can be carried out in order to let the New World Order become reality, so that the human beings all over the world do not look behind the scenes of the might games of the rulers. Of the secret services and of the army, everything is concealed from the outside and portrayed completely out of touch with reality by lies, deception as well as false representations and false reports. Accordingly, the American people believe what they are supposed to believe, as is the case in Europe too, and namely also in Switzerland with regard to the EU dictatorship, against which Switzerland should exercise very special caution with regard to the Framework Treaty, which regarding Switzerland contains manipulations that are intended to drive the country into the clutches of the dictatorship. Something, however, all know-it-alls and supporters of the treaty are not able to recognize in their foolishness, and will only wake up when it is too late to still save something. It would be important for Switzerland that, above all, human beings who think clearly and rationally would take care of the affairs of the framework agreement, instead of elements who have fallen prey to foolishness and are in respect of intellect and rationality of unsound mind. About which, however, I have already explained to you on the 21st of April the necessary things which you should prepare and pass on to as many politicians, etc., as possible.
We will do that. But I think that those in charge of the framework agreement are not educated enough to recognize the manipulations in the agreement that you mentioned. Consequently, in their stupidity, they will endorse it, and others, also addicted to stupidity, will also sign it.
Which is indeed to be feared because in Switzerland, too, effectively incompetent elements lead such negotiations, which are neither capable of using their mind and reason nor their intellect. It would have to be the case in Switzerland that the government, as any other in any state would have to be, should consist only of human beings with experience of life and good sense, reason and intellect, but never of incompetent elements incapable of judgment. But now, Edward, dear friend, I have said everything you asked me recently. And with that, the time I was able to spend on our conversation today is also over again, which is why I must now leave again, because my duties are calling me. Farewell and goodbye.
Goodbye, and thank you very much for what you said.